hello everyone, and welcome to our program this afternoon. I'm Ann Nicol with the United Nations Association of New York. And today we're very pleased to present a discussion of the role that independent journalism can play and has played in reporting on the war between Russia and the Ukraine. We're very honored to have with us Tikhon Dzyadko, editor-in-chief of TV Rain, and Ukrainian journalist Nataliya Gumenyuk, founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. As the war enters its third month, the challenges and indeed dangers of reporting in this highly charged environment are very apparent. To moderate this conversation, we are pleased to welcome back Lucy Westcott, Emergencies Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Lucy was a staff writer for Newsweek and has reported for The Atlantic, The Intercept, and was a UN correspondent for Interpress Service. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand over the program to Lucy Westcott to introduce our two guests. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for everyone for being here today. Again, my name is Lucy Westcott. I'm the Emergencies Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ. We are an organisation focused on defending freedom of the press worldwide. Thank you very much to the United Nations Association of New York City for having us and for expressing so much interest in this talk on the ongoing challenges of reporting on Russia's war. So I'm joined here today by two journalists who have very unique perspectives on covering this war and can speak about how the war has affected their lives both professionally and personally. And I will let Nataliya and Tikhon introduce themselves when I get to them. We will speak for about 40 minutes and we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. I'm sure everybody knows how to do this by now, but you can of course ask your questions in the chat, or there is a special Q&A box for that purpose as well. As Anne said, we are now nearly 3 months into this war, which has upended the lives of millions of people. Journalists and journalism has played an essential role in this war, and CPJ, my organisation, continues to document press freedom violations in Russia and Ukraine, and we continue to document the injuries and deaths of journalists who have been killed while covering this war. So Nataliya, if we could start with you, please. Can you give us a proper introduction and tell us a little bit about the work that you do? You are, of course, the co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. So can you tell us a bit about why you set that up? What role does it play right now in covering the war in Ukraine? And you are muted.
Hi, I'm in Ukrainian journalism for almost last 2 decades. My focus is conflict reporting. So for quite a long time, I was reporting foreign conflicts, unless the Russian aggression came to our house in 2014. And since then, I've been covering the occupation of the Crimea and the conflict in the Donbass, all kind of the conflict negotiations and opportunities to resolve this conflict by any other way than military. And our organization, I used to run quite a lot of different Ukrainian media, but our organization is a combination of the production and media think tank, which do research on how to deal with the polarization in the societies, how to, more or less do public interest journalism online and internet in new environment. However, of course, after the start of the war, of the new aggression, we are also very, my team is made of quite a few very capable filmmakers who used to cover the war. So we are dealing with frontline reporting for the last 3 months, more or less traveling all around the country, being more or less everywhere, while now we're launching a larger project on the documenting possible war crimes and crimes against humanity, We are specialized in this kind of sensitive and conflict reporting, but also I do report quite a lot for a number of the international media, from the Atlantic to the Rolling Stone, the Guardian, and the others. So our task is also partially to tell the foreign audience what's going on, but also deal with quite a lot of local stories. We're also helping a lot of local newsrooms and work with them and engage them into our national projects.
Thank you, Nataliya. That's quite a tall order. That's a lot that you are doing, and we can talk a bit about each of these things. But I wanted to ask, because on the website for the Public Interest Journalism Lab, there's a quote that says that your staff defend our country as journalists and as volunteers. So I'm struck actually by that idea of journalism, at least in this context, as a defense of the country. So can you tell us actually a little bit more about what that means?
So I probably need to explain, and probably the most important background, which is quite unusual for the wars at all, that this war is waged against democracy. So in a country where is working parliament, where is the army, and still during the war is accountable to the society which is extremely pluralistic, with incredible variety of the media, both partisan but also independent. And what's important to understand that in particularly the Kremlin is attacking democracy as such. So Ukraine is attacked as the country with the reason because its population went to the streets against authoritarianism in 2024 and 2014. So, everything Ukraine is today is like this positive anti-Russia somehow, where you have the elected government, where you have pluralism, where you have democracy. And what is very interesting and quite unusual, that though we the wars itself, considered to be, let's say, not civilized way, you want to understand that there should be, deals and other ways to do the conflicts. In the Ukrainian case, it's a fair, just, legit war, where the defense is the last option, and the whole war is fought with the idea of preserving pluralism, preserving democracy, preserving the human rights, even when Ukraine is fighting. So what is very unusual and not often kind of mentioned that much, that in fact, during the war, the Ukrainian society remains this pluralistic society, and somehow, in a way, even more functioning democracy than it was, to be honest, prior to the conflict, when there was so much political battles, PR, and everything. So in this regard, it's very interesting that everything we do has a very practical meaning, and the journalists also have a very clear role in a way to tell what's going on in order to help their communities to, and to deal with all those issues in the way which usually we should do in the time in the democratic societies.
Okay, thank you, Nataliya. Thank you very much. I want to just move to the act of reporting and how it has been done over the past 3 months. So we know that many Ukrainian journalists not only faced but continue to face difficult conditions while reporting. And by that, I mean, we at CPJ immediately started receiving requests about PPE, about how to report safely. This is it's a conflict zone. And am I right in saying that many of you and your colleagues became war correspondents somewhat overnight and had to quite quickly adapt to this new situation? I'm wondering how you adapted to reporting from a conflict zone, both in terms of your role as a reporter and also personally. And did you have to acquire that equipment, bulletproof vests, helmets, that kind of thing?
So look, I'm in pretty unique position. I'm kind of I was, prior to the war in Ukraine, one of quite a few conflict reporters in the country. And then for the 8 years, me and my team in particular was focused. We used to make documentaries, and even when the war was unpopular, we still stayed on the topic. However, I want to give this a bit personal perspective, not just personal, but professional. So just collecting the team for the new project we are setting up, I wanted to get people from all over the country. And imagine a group of people when we, a week ago, we were doing some training on the international criminal law and security and trauma. So our Kharkiv correspondent with whom I work today, her house had been bombed. So actually her flat is destroyed. Her former office in the center of the town, which is just some meters from where are you, is just fully shelled. It's demolished. Another journalist from newly occupied Kherson had to leave because of the death threats. Another journalist in Kherson region from Kakhovka has been detained by the Russians for 8 days. He was tortured and luckily released. A journalist from the Donbas region, she left her house in Severodonetsk, she's in Dnipro, but her town is basically hardly existing at the moment. Another journalist in Irpin, who wasn't really a war correspondent, she can't live in that house. Another videographer with whom we maybe covered, we went to Crimea together at some point, but he spent 2 weeks in Bucha and luckily escaped, in a very drastic moment. Another journalist from Chernihiv, her house has been shelled. Her father was detained because he used to be in the army before he was retired. Her husband is fighting. These are just some of them whom I mentioned, apart from all others to whom this war has a very, very not personal, but this type of impact. So apart from many local journalists who had to totally change their life, because for instance, our team, we met for instance, an owner of the TV station in Bucha. Bucha is a nice suburb of Kyiv where 30,000 people live. And he used to have the TV station there. It's a super provincial TV station, which of course overnight should do some incredible thing. And he stayed there and he reported. So somehow the whole country is, under the attack, all the journalists. A lot of had to leave, a lot of have families, kids, so they probably need to migrate and leave the country, but quite a few stayed. So for us, the biggest challenge is, of course, not just psychological and emotional. I think we are in a bit better shape because we have a very clear sense of purpose, what journalists should do. However, the journalists who didn't do they've done some other type of journalism, sport reporters, they do war reporting at the moment. But it's honestly, the biggest challenge is really the logistical challenge. You should be able to live, to work, to have a fuel to go, to find the way to get to your people under the shelling, under the different condition, to work under the occupation if it's necessary. So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge psychological and moral challenge. But I should really, and not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody is capable. However, there is people I mentioned just, they do such an incredible job on the ground, and they were never really supposed to do that in this environment.
Thank you, Nataliya. I just, the examples you gave of journalists who have been shelled, their houses destroyed, themselves and their family detained by Russian forces. That is just an impossible situation to deal with. Thank you for sharing those examples. Just thank you. I want to move on. You spoke a little bit about the psychological and moral challenge, and this, in speaking to journalists in Ukraine, that psychological aspect has come up. I read a piece that you recently wrote for The Atlantic magazine. You interviewed the leaders of the Donbas region, and you spoke to a woman named Milena and her 4-year-old daughter. And the situation there was that they were, you say they were frozen in fear. They were concerned that an evacuation bus would fill up before they could get on it. And then, of course, shelling began. How do you, in a situation like that, which is just the human cost of this war is so stark in that example, how do you keep yourself safe reporting on a story like that, both psychologically, but of course also physically as well? Because that is it was an example that really stuck with me from that particular piece of reporting.
So look, I do think it's like a bit being on the duty. I do think that there is a very clear role of the journalists to serve their communities on the local level, on the national level. And especially if, for instance, we are, trained and it's our profession and we chosen this profession, that's what you really do. You're not really supposed, you have a choice not to do that. And I know, a different choice made by people. By the way, yes, I know a lot of just here in and I by the way, I want to stress this distinction. By here in Kharkiv, the region which is, let's say, just 30, like less than 30 miles to the Russian border, where still part of the towns and villages are not freed and the fighting takes place now. I have at least 3 journalists, 2 of them female, who went to fight. They are not reporting. They volunteer. They are now conscripted in the army. And that's, by the way, a choice by some of them, and some remained in the profession. I do believe that, the scale of this war is so big, the impact on the society is so big, there won't be ever foreign press able to tell all those stories. There are 400, up to 500,000 people live in Mariupol, let's say. So everybody has this story. How much of them would be on the cover of any foreign media or somewhere? But every story needs to be told. We probably won't be capable, but as I said, like it's a war against an incredibly big country by the biggest country in the world, which is fought all over the place, and there is no other way. That would be our answer. Again, and this is just but it's choice. Nobody tells us. Everybody makes a choice where a person wants to work, and I think we're also dealing with our colleagues, but I think the sense of purpose helps people not to feel powerless, because you really know your journalism really, really clearly matters.
No, that's a great point. Thank you, Nataliya. I have a final question for you, but I actually want to just add one, because you talk about, there's obviously a lot of foreign press in Ukraine, working alongside local journalists and journalists who have reported on the country forever. I'm wondering, when you occupy 2 roles, you are reporting for foreign news and magazines while you're also reporting for publications inside your own country. When you report for foreign news outlets, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, for example, do you see a certain type of story or set of topics that foreign press want you to report on versus those that you report on for a Ukrainian audience?
So I'm again in a bit privileged position. I'm asked to write these stories. I don't even need to pitch, but I do have clear agenda as a journalist, let's say like that. Not just because I'm doing that for my country. That's the way I do international reporting anywhere. I do think that there is some compassion fatigue in the societies, and there are some cliches in the way when the humanitarian crisis and different kind of war stories are told, where there is this victimization of the people, and they are definitely victims, and Ukrainians are the victims. And I do, anytime when I see people, I see an incredible strength and resilience, the things. So in this regard, I think that Ukrainians don't want to be perceived as victims. Ukrainians want to, be perceived as the people who fight, who are absolutely brave, and who, do their best with some support, but basically on their own, on every single level. Just today, I met the 18 years old young football player who went to fight, so he doesn't want somebody like Putin run his city, who, like the person with because he wants that there should be an elected president. There would be a guy who worked for a security company who doesn't want to be told how he should live, and a person who was repairing some equipment in some towns near here, Kharkiv, because they were all locals. And you see that the people are really, really, participating in all these things. And it's not just about the military, it's about, mayors, local city authorities, or like any person who, for instance, cook for their community under the shelling. And I do think it's very important for me to tell those stories, to tell the variety of stories, which probably just would speak more about the society. For the Ukrainian audience, I would do more problematic stories, where maybe evocation isn't really working properly, like a small local nuance pieces where you see some lacks in the way government does something wrong, or some community isn't served, so some help is needed. Maybe some was kind of some political story behind that. So the local stories we would do would be quite the one when we would identify the problem in order to fix this problem, so people would know, or the authorities would know, or there would be some debate around the topic, even during the war, I should say.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. It's a great answer. Thanks. And a final question for you for now. I know that earlier this month, it was a Pulitzer Prizes, and that the Pulitzer Prize board gave a special citation to Ukrainian journalists. Now this was given, and I quote from the board, quote, "for their courage, endurance, and commitment to truthful reporting during Vladimir Putin's ruthless invasion of their country and his propaganda war in Russia," end quote. I'm just curious, like, what does that mean, if anything, actually, to Ukrainian journalists to be recognized in that way? Is it something that you think this is really wonderful, or is it like, thank you very much, but we have a job to do?
No, I think that there was a totally different debates, because Ukrainian society is extremely pluralistic and people like to quarrel and argue about everything. Even the war doesn't stop that often. But the idea was that there are, of course, Ukrainian journalists are different. There are very good ones, there are very bad ones. There are people who are maybe ethically questionable. There are people who are extremely politically biased. So we kind of pretend, say, like, these are for the real journalists. And especially by that, I mean, in particular, the people I mentioned earlier, like really a lot of the regional reporters. We should also remind that there were 27 journalists killed at this war. There were people who were detained. There are the independent newsrooms who work. And I do that. There are some, I don't know, people who maybe behave a bit like the propagandists, but to be honest, we don't find them important. We know that they exist anywhere, but the core of the Ukrainian journalism, the most important topics are really, driven by the quite a strong community. It should be always better, things could be always better. We could report it better, but the scale is so big that I really, anytime I open the news in the morning, I just like how we can cover that. And when I see the story when somebody covered, and I thought like, okay, it would be great to make that story. I'm just very happy that somebody covered that story, that it's there. So I would say that it's a very legit mentioning for the really for the profession as it is, not just for the Ukrainian journalists, because I think they given the real, again, meaning to their profession, which was debatable with all the politicians speaking about the fake news and all the other things. Even now, to finalize, it's interesting because it became even easier during the war for Ukrainian journalists to, because we used to have quite antagonistic relations with the government, and even with the with the military, it's never easy. But they really understood why these journalists are there. They are coming not just to criticize them or investigate something, that there is a role, and actually we're just doing very different things. And we have our way to serve our communities. The government has a different way, and we can make it. We can manage. We're part of the societies, but just being on the different sides of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Nataliya. Tikhon, I'm going to move on to you. And just a reminder to everyone as well that if you do have any questions for our two panelists, please do put them in the chat or in this special Q&A box, and we will get to them. So Tikhon, you're in a slightly different situation. You are one of hundreds of Russian journalists who have gone into exile since the start of this war. And of course, when we talk about the war in Ukraine, it does have a wider regional impact when we're speaking about press freedom and when we're speaking about the ability to actually do journalism. So, of course, Tikhon, your news outlet, TV Rain or Dozh TV, was the last independent TV channel in Russia, forced off the air in March. You're now in Georgia, in Tbilisi. So can you tell us about why you chose to leave, what your journey was like out of the country to your new temporary, semi-permanent home, and how your TV Rain colleagues are currently doing? Yeah, how are they?
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It has never been easy for independent journalists in Russia. It has never been easy for TV Rain over its 12 years of existence. But of course, since the beginning of the war, everything has changed. Before, we thought that being recognized as so-called foreign agent was a huge problem. Before, we thought that being under the threat from the leader of Chechen Republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, was a big problem. Before, we thought that being cut off major cable and satellite networks was a big problem. But since the beginning of the war, we understood that it was just nothing. So when the war started, we, of course, started to report on it on the 24/7 level. I think in 3 or 4 hours since the beginning of our news coverage, I got a call from Roskomnadzor. It's the regulator of the Russian media, or you can say it's a ministry of the censorship. And the woman from Roskomnadzor, she was telling me something like, you know, the situation is so tough. You should only spread real information and not spreading fakes. And I was like, yes, that's what we've been doing over the last 12 years. But in a day or two, they started to invent new law saying that everyone who is spreading fake news about Russian military activities in Ukraine could face up to 15 years in jail. And as a fake news about Russian military activities in Ukraine, they consider everything except messages from Russian Ministry of Defense. So that's why at the beginning of the March, when our website, just like websites of other independent media, was blocked, we decided to shut down the operations of TV Rain. Though we understood that it was very important for our audience these last days, only on YouTube, I'm not mentioning other platforms, but only on YouTube, we had 25 million views per day in Russia, in Ukraine, in other Russian-speaking countries. But we understood that we had a choice. The first option was to become part of the Department of Information of Russian Ministry of Defense and only spread real information about the war. And by real, I mean here information coming from Russian Ministry of Defense, which was absolutely impossible for us. The second option was to continue doing what we've been doing over the last 12 years and truly reporting about what is happening, about deaths among civilians and about crimes committed by Russian military, and go to jail up to 15 years. We decided that we would be more useful for our audience and for our country if we would be free and if we would have an opportunity, a possibility to continue working. So something like 60 people or 60 or 70 people from TV Rain decided to leave the country. A lot of them moved to Georgia because Georgia is very comfortable for Russian-speaking people, and it does not require visa for Russian citizens. And we launched several YouTube channels here. We continue to reporting from here, but I think that soon, in a month or so, we will relaunch TV Rain in a different place, and I think it will be as well very important for our audience, because we see how eager is Russian audience to get independent information about everything which is happening.
Yes, thank you, Tikhon. I had a question about that, but I will first, we can get to that in a minute. I'm very curious, what are the challenges of reporting from exile and keeping a newsroom going when everybody is scattered? You know, talk us through some of the kind of practical challenges that you're facing right now. And when you do relaunch, do you think that will be in Tbilisi? Will that be people who are, again, I know that Russian journalists have gone to many different countries as Ukrainian journalists. So again, tell us a bit about what it's like to report from exile.
Well, it's a nightmare, and I've been always very skeptical to the Russian-speaking media working from Prague or from Washington, DC, or from other places, because it's hard to be a Russian journalist and not being in Russia. But unfortunately, we are in a condition when the page of Russian history called Russian independent media has been turned. There is no independent media in Russia anymore. Unfortunately, of course, there is a lot of amazing independent Russian journalists, but almost all of them are not in Russia anymore. And now we face two main challenges. The first challenge, or the second, is how to get information. I'm sorry, this is my little son. So one of the problems is how to get through this, I would say, digital iron curtain, which is being built by the Russian government, and how to reach out to the Russian audience. Of course, because a lot of websites are blocked, social media such as Facebook or Instagram or Twitter are blocked. Of course, people are using VPNs to get access to them, but we don't know what will happen tomorrow and whether great Russian wall on internet would be built or not. We don't know. So this is one of two main challenges we are facing now, and we're hoping that technologically educated people will help us here, because maybe I am naive, but I think that technological progress is always one step ahead of the repressions. But the second challenge is how to get information from Russia, because if your website was blocked, if you were forced to leave the country, if you were forced to shut down the TV station, if after this you relaunch your TV station somewhere in Europe, of course you become more enemy of the state than you used to be. And of course, it's not safe for anyone to work for this media outlet in the country. So now we are considering different options about how we could respond to this challenge. As for the relaunch, I don't think it will take place in Georgia. I'm a huge fan of Georgia. My wife and our news director, Ekaterina Katrikadze, she is Georgian, and our family is here, and we have a lot of friends here, and the weather and everything is very good here, and people are welcoming us here. But the problem is that government here is trying to sit on edge, is trying to, as we say in Russian, is trying to sit on two chairs. Georgia is one of few countries in Europe which did not impose sanctions against Russia. They are afraid, I mean, the current government of Georgia is afraid that Georgia will once again become a target of Kremlin aggression like it was in 2008, and they are nervous about a lot of political activists or independent journalists here in Georgia. So that's why we will move to Europe. We are considering different options now, but I think that we will make a relaunch in, as I said, in a month or maybe a month and a half.
Okay, yeah, it's certainly, I know there's a lot of Russian journalists there, and it must be a very strange situation to be in, and perhaps quite an uncertain one, where you are kind of halfway into safety, perhaps, in a way. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, obviously we've spoken a bit about this, but the press freedom landscape in Russia has, of course, been bad for a very long time. Russia is so every year CPJ does a census of journalists who have been killed around the world, and also journalists who are in jail and where they are. Last year, CPJ documented Russia as being one of the worst countries in the world for jailing journalists, and we have seen journalists being jailed for reporting on protests recently. This is something we know. So I know that you say there's no independent media left in Russia, but there are still journalists there, independent journalists. What are they possibly able to do right now as an independent journalist who is still in Russia? What can you do, if anything?
Well, unfortunately, most of these independent journalists which I mentioned, they are not in Russia anymore because it's not safe. It's an absurd, because you could face up to 15 years in jail only to use 3 letters, WAR. If you call the war in Ukraine war and not special military operation, as it is being said in narrative by Russian government, you could be prosecuted. And these independent journalists who are still in Russia, they are trying to find some words. They are trying to find some ways to tell what they want to say. This is really humiliating, but still they are managing to report on important stories. For example, some independent journalists in the regions. For example, there is a media called Люди Байкала, the people of Baikal, and they are reporting on deaths among Russian soldiers from these regions, deaths which had no sense. I mean, why would they go to Ukraine? And it is really important, because a lot of people, after reading the stories of these young men, they start to think about the senseless of this terrible war. But I am afraid that the activities of independent journalists in Russia, they will not last long, because people are getting, I would say, attention from prosecutor offices all over the country, and more and more journalists decide to leave the country and to continue working from abroad. This is really sad, but this is the situation where we unfortunately live now.
Okay. Thank you, Tikhon. One more question for you. Then I will ask you both a question, and then we can open it up to the audience. So we have, there has been talk of kind of parallel wars going on. Of course, we have the war in Ukraine. That is a conflict that involves artillery, weaponry, etc. We also have something of a propaganda war going on in Russia. And you've touched upon the fact that in order for Russians inside of the country to receive information, there's the use of VPNs, but it is still quite difficult. So besides that, I guess I'm asking, how else, if at all, are people able to access independent information on the war? And do you think there's been quite a lot of reporting about how, some people in Russia will simply not believe that what family and friends in Ukraine are experiencing or seeing is true? There is just simply they cannot believe it, they will not believe it, because the information that they are receiving is so deeply entrenched. Is that still the case? Is there any kind of shift being made? Tell us a bit about that, please.
Well, in Russia, as I mentioned, almost all social media are blocked: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, but YouTube is still not blocked. And for example, Telegram is not blocked yet. And a lot of people are getting information from YouTube and Telegram. And again, a lot of people are very digitally educated, so a lot of people are using VPNs to get information. But this problem of those who just don't want to believe in terrible things, I think it is the most important problem, because if you look at the Russian society, first of all, do not believe these polls about 83% of Russians supporting the war, because it's just impossible to conduct sociology in fascist state. It's just like asking Germans in 1942 whether they support what Nazis are doing or not. But I think that Russian society is divided in three parts now. The first part are people who are against the war, but they are afraid to speak out, and they get independent information from independent resources. The second part are people who support the war, and they have their own reasons. Some of them are brainwashed by the propaganda. Some of them believe in the great empire because when they were young, there was a great empire. Some of them has other reasons. But the third part of the Russian society, and as long as I understand, the biggest part of the Russian society are people who are in denial, people who just don't want to believe in all these terrible things, because if they do believe in these terrible things, this will destroy their lives. Like since our childhood, we've been told by our teachers in school and by everybody that our grandfathers, they saved the world from the fascism, and they were fighting fascists who were putting bullets in the head of innocent people. And that's the fundament on which we were raised. And now during this war, we have to admit that our government, our soldiers are doing the exact same things, which means that all the world which was built for us during our lives is destroyed now. And if it's destroyed, these people have to ask questions. What do I do in this situation? Do I protest and face jail or fines, or I'm losing my job? Do I leave the country, but I don't have a job there? I don't have money. What should I do? And a lot of people choose not to do anything, just to sit tight. And a lot of them just don't want to believe in these terrible things. A lot of people are writing to me, and they are saying, I understand everything about Putin. I understand everything about Kremlin. I understand that this war is not okay. I'm against this war, but I just don't want to believe that our boys could do such terrible things. I just don't want to believe it. And I think that this part of Russian society, this part of Russian audience, is the main target for us, for the TV ring. Because it's the first part of the audience who is against the war is loyal. The second part of the audience who supports the war, it's impossible to talk to them because they are brainwashed and infiltrated by the propaganda. And this third part of the society is the most important part of the audience with which we have to work, and we have to patiently explain them that shit, I'm sorry, terrible things are happening now, and we just have to admit it.
Thank you very much, Tikhon. That makes sense. Okay, I'm looking at the time, so I am going to hand it over now to the audience for any questions you have for our panelists. And Carlo, I think you are going to be reading out those questions.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you so much, Tikhon and Nataliya, for being here today. We're really honored to have you. I'm on UNA New York's communication team, and I'll be reading out some questions. So please send them in to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will do my best to get to everybody and try to kind of combine some questions together if needed. So a question for Nataliya. The war has kind of taught the world that Ukraine is a very complicated linguistic situation. How does this affect reporting in the country? Are there separate Russian and Ukrainian language channels? Are they bilingual? Does it fall across kind of political lines? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
There is no much complex situation. The population is basically bilingual. So really, for my 20 years, I do really say the situation with the language was really, really overdone a lot, including by, I'm not speaking about just propagandistic Russian media, but I'm speaking also by the Western media who caught about something and can't just comprehend that people can just speak two languages and it matters nothing but the habit, like nothing but the habit. So I really think that the language has zero influence in particularly in this war, if we speak about the Ukrainian society. To be honest, I'm partially Russian speaker, and I'm today in Kharkiv, where quite a lot of people speak Russian, just because this, for years and years and years, let's say, imagine Wales, where English dominated, for a long time and is more spoken than the Welsh. And it doesn't mean, it can't mean much politically, which had been confirmed by multiple research.
Thank you, Nataliya. Tikhon, a question for you. You mentioned a news source in the Baikal area. Are kind of local or provincial papers subject to the same level of scrutiny as, say, a national project like TV Rain in Russia?
Yes, of course. The situation with the regional press in Russia has always been much harder as the situation with media outlets in Moscow or St. Petersburg or other big cities, because journalists in big cities, they always felt themselves more protected because, big city, more attention, more influence, etc., etc. And regional journalists, they were always under the threat from local authorities, from local businesses, etc., etc. And the other problem that people in the regions, journalists, I mean, they always had more troubles with financing because they were more connected with local authorities or local businesses, and they were under the pressure from them. As for example, and if we're speaking about current situation, of course they are under attack now as well. For example, the newspaper called Pskovskaya Gubernia in Pskov region. First, at the beginning of the war in 2014, they made an investigation about Russian soldiers who fought in Ukraine, while the government was saying that Russian soldiers were not participating in the war, and they found the grace of these soldiers, and this was the first time when they were attacked by the government. Now, when they continue to report on the war, their office was searched. Some of journalists were arrested, and it's just an example. A lot of journalists in the regions are now under attack, and some of them already decided to leave the country, unfortunately.
Thank you for that answer, Tikhon. We have another question here for both of you. Would donations from other democracies, ordinary citizens, such as US, Britain, Europe, Japan, would they help your organizations and your papers, or would that increase the Kremlin's propaganda about you being foreign agents?
Well, I can answer, since our TV station in Russia was designated as foreign agents, even though we did not accept any international money, but who cares? We were designated as foreign agents a year ago. Now we are planning to work from abroad. And of course, at the beginning, we are going to to work with some organizations and some donors, but we have a very strong principle. We are not going to take any money from any governments because we think that it's really important for the journalists not to take money from the governments, because on the one hand, that's just not right, and I always oppose funding from the government. On the other hand, we don't want to help Russian propaganda, because if we receive money from, I don't know, State Department or the government of Albania or the government of I don't know, any other country, Russian propaganda could easily say, look at them, they are working on their money. It means that they are working on their demand. But of course, we are always very grateful for any donations from individuals or any organizations. It really helps us a lot.
I just want to jump in because I have quite an opposite point from Tikhon, but I understand he works in a totally opposite environment. As I again mentioned, that Ukraine is a functional, pluralistic democracy. I think globally now the governments should support media. There is nothing bad in that. There are public broadcasters anywhere. The journalism, I'm speaking about like a democratic governments and democratic society, of course, not like Russia. We can discuss. I'm just saying that for the last years, we're working a lot in a way that we should understand that the commercial model of the journalism isn't really functioning internationally, because commercial, the journalism is the service. There should be some ways how we need to support, in particular, local reporting. But of course, I'm speaking about the model of the public funds, like anywhere in Europe, like in Canada or elsewhere, where quite a lot of good journalism is basically supported by the philanthropists, but also the government with a particular condition of non-interference, and it's absolutely possible, but of course not in the totalitarian societies. Just like to be very clear that I don't think that it's, I think there is my criticism would come to the commercial model of the journalism today in global, but I think it's a totally different, story to discuss.
Thank you very much, both of you, for those answers. Natalia, a question for you. So, Ukraine has undergone a lot of political changes in the past 10 years, between kind of more pro-Russian governments and where we are now. How has the press freedom situation changed, for example, from, I don't know, Yanukovych's government to after?
So just to say, there was no any point in the recent Ukrainian history since 1991 when Ukraine has been a really dictatorship and authoritarian state. There was an attempt to create so from 2010 till 2014. I won't say the whole development after the Soviet time was really good. We do have the cases of the journalists murdered. We do have the cases of the oligarch-owned media empires. But at the same time, Ukraine always remained pluralistic. more or less, little by little in 2022, I think we found ourselves being lucky in society where everybody understands that the media should be free, that there should be diversity of the opinions, and just the territories which are occupied the Russian. So, like this difference, this striking difference with Russia in particular, really even forces Ukraine, even like the others tell, like, no, that's exactly what we don't want. So somehow we have this paradoxical case when war making society even more democratic, because it's at core of this war about which I started there are, of course, the challenges how we can operate in an environment with a neighboring fascist state when the propaganda is really instrumental in and is used to dehumanize Ukrainians for the last 20 years, which actually is one of the reasons why the Russian soldiers are murdering Ukrainians. So for quite a lot of years, I've been quite critical about the concept that we're speaking too much about the propaganda, but this war again showed that no, we actually not overestimated, but underestimated the role, how instrumental the propaganda could be in really creating the narrative which allows the Russian military to murder innocent people in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Nataliya. I think we have time for one more question, and I'd like to ask a question. I studied Russian in university, and a source we used fairly often was Meduza, which I know is a project that's based in the Baltic area. It's not based in Russia. So I was very interested, Tikhon, to hear you talk about the difficulties in that and how it's very different reporting from inside Russia and outside Russia. I don't know if maybe you have a comment on Meduza specifically, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about what the sacrifice is when you decide to base a news source about Russia outside of Russia. And whether in the case of a news source like Meduza, for example, and hopefully TV Rain in the future, whether that would pay off.
Well, the case of Meduza is amazing. I think Meduza is one of the best Russian news outlets, but we have to see the difference between what has been before the war and what is actually happening now. Before Meduza had a lot of journalists in Moscow and other Russian cities. Now they have just a few, and I think that sooner or later they will face the same problem, which we will face after their relaunch, that it would be not safe for the journalists to work for these independent Russian-speaking media working from abroad. And as I said earlier, this is one of the main challenges that we are going to face: how to report about Russia while not being in in Russia. I'm sure we will find the ways to get information from Russia, because luckily internet is still working, and people still has access to the internet in Russia. We could find a lot of anonymous reporters there, and we could get information from there, but we're still in discussion how to be Russian media and not actually being in Russia.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое.
Okay, so thank you all very much for this very informative and very stimulating discussion, and really appreciate Tikhon and Nataliya for coming on to join us today, and Lucy for moderating it. So Carlo, can you show us what our next slide is? Thanks. Okay, so anyone out there who would like to join UNA New York, we accept all applications. and it is on our website, UNA-NYC.org. And our next program and annual meeting will be on June 7th. And we will be discussing education in girls and women's education in Afghanistan and the backsliding of that. Everyone, again, thank you so much and best of luck, and thinking of you again. Have a wonderful day.